are welcome to the Lopes. مرحبا بكم كلكم. welcome to أهلا وسهلا. We are delighted to have today with us Dr. Calos Lopes. I had the chance last year to receive him when he made a presentation on trade and industrialization in Africa. And today we are proud to have him also with us to talk about structural transformation of Africa. Dr. Calos Lopes is very well known for BADEA stuff, so I don't need to present him. I will give him the floor. Dr. Calos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Director General for this invitation and all of you for receiving me. It's a short period of time, second time, but I'm very pleased to be with you. The Director General asked me whether I could speak on structural transformation, and I would like to start by mentioning that this debate about structural transformation is not a new debate. It's from a theoretical point of view, a debate that has started very long time ago. There's more than 100 years that economists are discussing structural transformation. But it has created a different meaning when economies in Southeast Asia engaged in a very rapid change of their economic structure. And that change came after one Nobel Prize winner of economics, Gunnar Myrdal, Swedish, had published a book about 2 decades before the beginning of the East Asian miracle, saying that in his view, and he was someone studying that region, it was not possible to really take off economically in Southeast Asia, because there were a lot of dimensions in their economic structure that were not going to allow them to develop fast. And so he basically said at the time that East Asia was a hopeless region. He actually used that word in one of his articles. And guess what? He was completely wrong, despite being a Nobel Prize winner of economics. Later, the reality has demonstrated that he was completely wrong about East Asia. And the reason why he was so wrong, from a theoretical point of view, is because he didn't take into account possibilities of accelerating transformation and change that actually happened in East Asia. And because they happened, this debate about structural transformation gained a new momentum. People wanted to understand why is it that these countries, this group of countries, managed to very quickly, in the space of a generation, become so well endowed in terms of not just wealth creation, but also transformation of the economic structure. So ever since, we talk about East Asian miracle, we talk about Asian tigers, there are all kinds of things that are attributed to this phenomenon. And we are all around the issue. This was provoked by structural transformation. Nowadays, we have also a similar situation in relation to Africa. About 20 years ago, The Economist had the cover of its magazine with Africa, the hopeless continent. And everybody remembers that not very long ago, about 7 years ago, the situation started to change in the sense that the economists started to say positive things about Africa. And about 3 years ago, they published another cover where they were saying Africa, the continent of the future. So that sparkled the debate about structural transformation again. each time that there is a region that starts accelerating the pace of its transformation, the debate on structural transformation comes back. So it is important for us to understand what economists mean by structural transformation. What they mean, I can say it in one sentence, is about how the economic structure becomes more productive. That's economic transformation. How do you make it more productive? Productivity is the way you measure efficiency. The more productive an economy becomes, the more efficient it is. It's not a coincidence that the most developed economies are also the most productive and the most efficient. And efficiency and productivity are a very complex array of factors. Part of it, of course, is the skills mix. Another dimension is the regulatory system, the quality of the institutions. Another, of course, can be the quality of innovation and technology, and how much technology is present in the mix. Another can be how countries have managed their investment on infrastructure. Because the more infrastructure you possess, the less cost you have for production. So you can have a number of elements that enter into the productivity. But there is one that is not there, which is normally being natural resources endowed. Meaning, you are rich with natural resources, and you have a lot coming from your natural resources, like you are an oil exporting country. That doesn't give you any productivity. And unfortunately, most African countries, the number one creator of wealth was natural resources, which is a dimension that has nothing to do with productivity per se. You can actually extract the oil with a company that comes, has all its technology. That company may have high levels of productivity, but doesn't affect the country at all. It can just be an island that comes and does it for you. So for a long time, Africans were living out of their natural resources and not investing on productivity. Not investing on issues that have to do with structural transformation. So let's see what is the result of that situation. The result is, I'm going to just do some bullets. Number one problem, agriculture, because it employs the majority of the Africans. Even today, with the boom in other sectors, it still employs 66% of Africans. I'm always talking about the entire continent. 66%. Yet, it's contributing to Africa's GDP, combined GDP, or just about 10%. If the African GDP is already quite low, if it is 10% of that low, basically we are talking about poverty. Majority of people in Africa that work in the primary sector are poor. Why? Because productivity is very low. Productivity is so low that it is the lowest in the world. Just to put it simple, it is the lowest in the world. How do you measure productivity? You measure productivity in various ways, but the most common in an area like agriculture is to say, what is your yield per hectare? What is the average yield per hectare? And the yield per hectare in Africa is lower than any other region in the world. As simple as that. So if you look into agriculture in the United States, which is the country with the highest productivity in the agricultural sector, Brazil being the second, you will see that the yield per hectare is very, very high. Why? They employ technology. They have incentive schemes that come from the regulatory system. They have access to capital. their infrastructure is good, the skill mix that allows for one person in a tractor to produce vast areas of hectarage, or people that are in labs that are producing the best seeds is very high. So all these elements that I was just mentioning before are part of defining productivity. So as a result, Africa, leaves out of its natural resources. It can be copper, it can be iron ore, it can be bauxite, it can be oil, it can be cocoa, it can be tea, but we are not making any effort on the productivity side. So first consequence of not doing structural transformation is the fact that our primary sector is very good. And with that comes a lot of problems. Second consequence, productivity, as its name already says, it's about changing also production system. We are going to change production systems is to make them more modern. Making them more modern means they are also more formal. So it's not informal economy. So it's part of the institutional legal system of the country. And it comes with certain habits of work that are linked to the industrializing of a production system. Normally we start with how the industrialization beginnings were, which was making sure that a certain number of tasks are divided and people specialize on those tasks. Then you create lines of production that accelerates the pace of how you are able to deal with the different tasks, and that creates the basis for manufacturing. And then when manufacturing started in Manchester with textiles, it was about what people used to do manually, one by one, being now multiplied with machines in a much more accelerated pace. And then we remember this discussion about the Model T, which was the first car by Ford that created the modern manufacturing system. Now, if you don't have these systems of production in a country, or you don't have them enough, you can have a bit, but you don't have them enough, it means that all the alignment around the systems of production that is required by manufacturing is not there. So I think it's very important for us to make a distinction between industrialization and manufacturing. Of course, manufacturing is part of industrialization, but industrialization is bigger than manufacturing. It's about changing the systems of production to an industrial era, to make sure that we are now automating a certain number of functions, that we are efficient in a certain number of functions, that we are formalizing a certain number of transactions, that we have access to certain levels of productivity, therefore, all the elements that I just mentioned. So that's the second factor. So Africa, just to go back, in the primary sector, has an agriculture that is not productive enough. Industrialization is not present enough. How do you measure that? Economists measure that with manufacturing value addition, MVA. And then if the country's MVA goes up, it means it's becoming more productive, and therefore the country is industrializing. If the MVA goes down, it means there is a problem, and the countries are losing what they already had. If it remains stable and it's very low, it means the country is not making efforts to transform itself. What is the situation in Africa? In the 1970s, our manufacturing value addition was 16% of our economy. Today, of course, Africa has many more people, than in the 70s, right? We have doubled our population since the 70s. Countries have become independent completely, and the economy has grown as well. But still, in percentage terms, today's manufacturing value addition in Africa is 11%. So have gone down instead of going up. So which means, if you take into account not the segments of the economy that are most progressive and developed, but the entire economy of the continent, we are actually worse in terms of productivity than we were in the 70s. Some people say, but now we have lots of things that we didn't have then. True, but you have more people and the economy is bigger. So the percentage should have gone much higher, or at least maintain at 16%. That would not have been bad. But if you go down, it means your productivity is losing in relation to what? Not necessarily to yourself, but in relation to the rest of the world. So you are going to become less competitive. The third element is that we have witnessed over the last 10 years a boom in services. There's, 3 big sectors: primary, secondary, and tertiary. That's how I'm focusing on the services. This boom has been provoked by 2 things mostly. One is the role of telecommunications. Access to telecoms, to telecom services have actually created value that is huge, that didn't exist before in the economies. There are presently about 10 countries in Africa where the value of the telecoms is higher than agriculture. Higher than agriculture. Just telecoms, IT, which is amazing, because the image we have is that has nothing to do with the new technologies, where in some countries the IT is already more than the value of agriculture. And the second element is the informalization of service sector, with the possibilities offered by new forms of financing, financial sector, but also with the possibilities of what we call frugal innovation, which is, instead of the very sophisticated innovation, is innovation for dealing with small problems, small issues. And Africans have proven to be very inventive in dealing with frugal innovation. You have a boom of services, but informal economy. So people are surviving, but not necessarily integrated in the formal economy. They have lots of activities in services. Let's say you are a family of 4, and nobody has a job, and then all of a sudden one of the members of the family opens a salon, for a hair salon. They will make sure that they will not pay taxes, that everything is a bit hidden from the formal economy. So this salon will give employment to 4 people first in the family, then later they can even employ other people. But they try to avoid any formal transaction. Always find a way. So which means that in Africa you have a huge number of people that are surviving or being employed through the informal sector. But what is important here to retain is that it is in the service sector. Why is such a concentration in the services? Because we have urbanized very fast. We have about 40% of Africans now that live in cities. So there is a lot of demand for the guy that sells SIM cards, the person that deals with certain types of transactions. And all of these people, they try to get out of the formal economy. So I laid out for you the three big challenges that are impeding structural transformation in Africa. Low agricultural productivity, lack of manufacturing environment and industrialization, and excessive formality in the service. If we don't change these three, we are not going to get into structural transformation. How do we make sure that we address this thing? Well, the easiest way is to have industrial policy. Why is it? Well, let me just very quickly tell you that industrial policy is a way of basically giving a strategy to the country. It's not about building factories. Industrial policy is about making sure that you don't leave things for the market to decide. A bit open. You are a bit more directive. And by being more directive, you are making sure that the country moves from its current levels of productivity to the type of productivity that we expect from an industrialized economy. That's what industrial policy is for. And by doing that, you are just imitating what others did before. There is $1 bill that has Mr. Hamilton in the figures. Not these figures. Normally, all the dollar bills have a figure of a founding president or someone, a politician that was important in history. The only exception until this year was this Mr. Hamilton. I say this year because President Obama has just approved another bill that has the figure of an African American hero, woman, for the first time. But this is not a bill that is going to circulate like the others. It's just for show. But Hamilton is in the bill because it's considered at the same level as the big founding fathers of the US. Why? Who is this Mr. Hamilton? Mr. Hamilton was never president or vice president. He was, in fact, the person that did the industrial policy of the United States. At the time, it was not called industrial policy. It was just about, he was the one who conceived the protectionist measures and incentive mechanisms that allowed America to industrialize. So he's commemorated this Sunday. Fast forward, if you look into what is happening right now in countries like China, we talk about India, they are basically doing what they do because they have industrial policy. Before them, countries like Singapore or Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, all the Southeast Asia, they all have industrial policy. Probably one of the countries with the best industrial policy ever was Korea. So what is the secret about this industrial policy? It's about the government and the private sector associated with it, determining a very clear focus for increasing the role of industrialization in the economy. And by doing so, they not only study the context and have targets, and have a context and have focus. Because you cannot industrialize just say, oh, I have created the conditions for entrepreneurs to move. And now it's their role. We should do it. No. You need to study the niche. Each country has a niche, potential or existing. And when you study the niche, you are going to study the value chain. What is it that you need to do in that niche to make sure that you are going to take into account your competition and you are going to position yourself well, industrialize with that niche in particular. And once you do that, you have to align all the government policies to support it. People in the Ministry of Education have to do something. People in transport have to do something. People in the finance area have to do something. Everybody has a role. And when you have a role, you have to be in synchrony, you have to be very converged, aligned with this overall objective of the country. That's industrial policy. If you don't have industrial policy, you live with a world where each ministry does something on its own. And when people mention industrialization, you say, well, that's the Ministry of Industry's problem. The difference between industrial policy and this attitude is that it's no longer the Ministry of Industry's issue, it's the government issue as a whole. The Ministry of Industry plays actually a very minor role in relation to the others. It's more the role of bringing the data and making sure that the right regulatory systems are in place. Ministry of Finance has a much bigger role to make industrialization happen. So in Africa, I'm going to leave the theory and go with examples. In Africa, we have the challenge of transforming our productivity with very low primary sector productivity, agriculture in particular, with lack of manufacturing value addition and very clear policies on industrialization, and too much informality and detachment of the service sector from the rest of the economy. If we look into the last 15 years, we can celebrate Africa's growth. We have never grown as much since independence as in the last 15 years. This year is not a very good one. Let's take this year aside. But if you go from 2000 to 2015, the average growth of the continent is 4.8%. And with peaks that go all the way to 6. That's fantastic. The reason why this year is not very good, I'll tell you later. This is fantastic. But this growth has not been based on structural transformation. Therefore, it is reversible. It is reversible because the moment the prices of commodities go down, it affects our growth. That's one problem. Second problem is not being losing growth. It doesn't create enough jobs. Obviously, I will give you an example. Extractive industries, very important for Africa. It represents about 50 to 60% of our exports. Extractive industries employ 1% of the employment of Africa. So you can see, it creates wealth, but it does not create jobs. So we have this problem. Growth without quality. Then we have a second problem, which is the fact that we are too much focused on aid, development aid. The majority of the countries think that aid is going to salvage them. But in fact, aid has been stable over the last 15 years at about 48, this year is going to be 42 billion. In the meantime, other sources of funding have multiplied. For instance, remittances from migrants. It's now 61 billion. Pension funds. It's equivalent to 380 billion. We can go on with the list, but the most important is taxes paid by Africans in their own countries have gone from 162 billion in 2000 to 600 billion last year. Now compare 162 to 600 to 48 to 42 billion of aid. So aid is going like this, taxes are going like this, remittances are going like this, pension funds are going like this, but we discuss aid, we don't discuss the other issues. Why? Because it's a mentality. And as a result of discussing the wrong issue, we don't deal right with the good, important resources that we have. And this is absolutely essential for us to do structural transformation. Because you cannot do structural transformation counting that aid is going to do it for you. It has to be domestic. Because you are changing the structure of production, you also have to change the structure of funding. You have to have much more of your own capacity. And by doing so, you will be able to mobilize actually more money from outside, but not aid money, investment money. Because people will see that you are this is just what I can imagine. We have to bring this forward. We have to create the motivation inside the country for this type of change that is going to actually bring more money from outside. And that's a real challenge that we have. So let's take the example of 2 or 3 countries, how they did it in Africa. You have a country like Ethiopia, you know they have been growing at 10% a year. It's now 10 years that they've been growing at 10%. This year is a bad year, they'll grow at 6. Bad year. If you take out of the African statistics, the 3 big economies of the continent, the 3 biggest, you know which ones are? The 3 biggest. First is Nigeria, second is South Africa, third is Egypt. If you take these 3 economies out, Africa has grown at 4.4% this year. That's what Africa will grow this year, 4.4. But the size of these 3 is so huge, they are all doing that we can grow. South Africa is going to be at 0 point something growth. Nigeria is going to go down. It's going to have minus something. In Egypt, the jury's out, but probably it's going to be less than 1%. So it is the size of these economies that is creating this average of Africa growing only 1.6% according to the IMF estimate. So let's not focus just on these 3 countries, let's focus on continent. And you can see that growth is still there, but is transformation taking place? Are these countries really transforming the structure of their production? And that's why the Ethiopian example is important. Ethiopia is changing the structure of its economy very fast. So probably its growth is going to be much more deeper and sustainable than the others. What are they doing right? They have industrial policy. They are imitating the Asia model. They have decided that they are going to do A, B, C, and D on the very sector. agricultural productivity has gone up by more than 25% in the last 10 years. Continues to go up. The fiscal pressure, meaning the taxes that people pay, are going up every year, about 1-2% every year. Manufacturing value addition has grown consistently. And the way they have dealt with the service sector is to focus on a certain number of champions, big companies that make a difference. The banks in Ethiopia are extremely capitalized, so they can fund big infrastructure projects. They decided to have the monopoly of the telecom sector to also make a lot of money out of the telecom sector, because it's a sector with a high return. And they say we are only going to privatize or allow other competitors after we have built as much as we can from this value addition to invest in other things. But the most phenomenal in the area of services is Ethiopian Airlines. Do you know that Ethiopian Airlines is the #1 exporter in Ethiopia? It has surpassed last year coffee and flour export. Ethiopia is #1 in export. So we have a company that is now 80 planes and has 45 planes. So it's going to have, in about 4 years, as many planes as Air France. This is an African airline. So it is possible to transform the economy. On manufacturing, I'll give you the example of Awasa, which is a southern city in Ethiopia. They have just inaugurated an industrial park that is one of the largest in Africa. This industrial park is specialized only in one area, textiles. So the Ethiopians studied the value chain, which countries are producing textiles, what are the incentives that they need to put in place. They put them in place. They looked into the #1 exporter of textiles in the continent, that is Mauritius. Exports $950 million per year of textiles. And Awasa alone has the ambition of exporting 1 billion, more than the #1 exporter in Africa. Just one industrial park. For that, they have aligned all types of policies. Transport, you need a link to the railway. Education, there is a university there. You need to change the curriculum of the university to conform to the needs of this industry. Banking sector, you need to put a loan system for people to build apartments, houses individually, because there is all these people that are coming for jobs. Environment, you need to make sure that this factory, this industrial park meets the environmental standards that will make them more attractive to come here and produce in Bangladesh or in Sri Lanka. So everybody has a role. It's not the Ministry of Industry responsibility, it's industrial policy. How many countries in Africa have adopted industrial policy approach? Doesn't need to call it by that name. Well, more than you think. About 20. And the others would like to do so because they see the results of Rwanda, Morocco, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, that are moving very fast in this direction immediately. So I think structural transformation is starting to really be serious consideration in economic policy in the world. Where does that leave us with international financial institutions? What is the position of the World Bank, the African Development Bank, IMF, on the structural process? 4 years ago, this was not even mentioned in any of the documents. Today, you can't find any document about Africa in these institutions that doesn't mention economic structural transformation. It has been adopted completely. When it comes to industrial policy, which is one way of doing structural transformation, there is a bit of hesitation. Because people say, if you do industrial policy, like the Asian tigers did, it has a very strong role of the state. Look at China. Is this possible in Africa? Is this even wishful in Africa? Well, we have to see which results each one is having. It's not a coincidence that people go to Kigali and say, what is going on here? This country is completely modified. This has happened over the last few years. It's amazing. Industrial policy means convergence, clarity, focus on how you want to achieve higher productivity. Again, it's not about manufacturing, it's about the full spectrum of changing the structure of the economy. So they are very clear in one about, for instance, something very practical, like human mobility. He said we need markets because we are a very small country. Our obvious markets are in Africa. How are we going to start delivering services for Africa, things for Africa? If they have a problem coming to our country, there is no visa. Can't open embassies in Africa, every African country. So why don't we change our visa regime and do visa on arrival for all Africa? You don't bother. You are African, you can go. When you get to Kigali, if you have an African passport, you pay your $20, you are in. A lot of people think it's going to be an invasion. There's no invasion. Kigali. It's no invasion. They're just benefiting from it. Now, every conference that is important, people want to be to Kigali. Why? If you do it in any other country, it's a visa. Okay. So you can deal with infrastructure, say, I have good hotels, I have this, I have that. You don't deal with the visa. Your hotels are empty. So this is just to say this convergence of policies across. This capacity to start thinking differently and aligning policies is the best way to do structural transformation. So I'm going to stop here. So you may have questions, and I will be very happy to give you examples of countries in Africa that are doing the right things in any of these areas. I have mentioned agriculture, the industrial and service sector, with very concrete examples if you are